I was born in Houston, Texas, and I had a collection of leather boots. I was your typical Texan that went to the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo every year. I loved animals, but I also consumed massive amounts of barbecue and chili and chicken and lobster and eggs, cheese, milk. I mean, bologna, spam, ribs, you name it, I ate it. All right? I mean, I was a true Texan. You know, chili cook-offs, barbecue cook-offs. The idea and the concept of being a vegan was never in my frame of reference. Okay, so I'm going to get real clear that I never planned on being a vegan. I came into this world in a very violent home. I was actually conceived from date rape. My mother was raped by my dad, and she married him. I came out fighting. I came out fighting everything, everybody. My daddy was very violent. He beat my mother all the time. So I lived in a realm of extreme violence, and I was always protecting my mother, constantly protecting. I was her savior all the time. Here I am, a kid. My mother's 16, and I'm her protector. I never had the nurturing, the mother, the energies that I needed. My dad was a drunk. He was never there. He was always either drunk, beating my mom, or checked out. And so I became the hero child. I became the one that had to conquer the world, and I was pissed off about it. I was angry as could be. Started out doing all the things. I started drinking at a very young age. Alcohol, experimented with drugs. No drug was off limits for me, so I'm going to get real clear on that. I've done just about all of them in every way, shape, fashion, and form you can put them in your body. Okay, so let's just get clear on that. I don't have to tell you all the things. And here I am today, sober, 12 years, haven't had any of that stuff in my body. 10 years ago, on October 31st, 2014, I went vegan on the Texas cattle ranch. I married my husband that I have now, Tommy, for the second time. We were married not once, but twice. I lived the extremes. And I was always pushing it to as far as I could go without killing myself. And I think I was trying really hard to do that, just testing the waters to see if I could ever just freaking die. But it never happened. I kept coming back. I was on the road with my own country western rock and roll band. I produced all kind of concerts. If anybody knows what the Houston Astrodome is, you may not, but if you know Houston, you know the Astrodome was huge. That's where all the big stars played. Doug Stone, Tracy Lawrence in the day, Trisha Yearwood. And my school that I had at the time produced shows in this Astrodome. We opened up for major acts. But what did I do? I would do all these big things. I would do alcohol, drugs, crash it to the ground. Every time. Crash it. Somebody always had to come to my rescue and save the day. I tried to get sober about 32 years ago, and so it's been a real struggle for me through my life. 11 years, 6 years, 4 years, 2 years, I would struggle with sobriety. And I can honestly say that this last time I got sober, I literally was on death's door, seriously, for the hardest time in my life. And I was willing to do whatever it took, finally. And I did. I changed everything about myself, my life. I went to AA meetings, still do. And I got a sponsor so I could learn, the steps. But, I always thought I knew everything. I was one of those people that thought I knew everything, and yet I couldn't keep it together. So when I married Tommy the first time, I had been sober for like 9 months on one of those stints. And so he met somebody that was very, sober. I wasn't drinking. I was singing. He met me at a nightclub. Had on a pair of red spandex pants, red satin, fringe out to here, white boot, leather boots. My hair all up. It was like in the late 80s, the makeup. And man, I had a wireless microphone. And when he came strutting in the room, I walked up to him. I sat in his lap and I started singing Crazy. And it was crazy from the get-go. Okay, I'll just tell you. That man fell in love with me. I fell in love with him. And he had no idea who I was, really. You know, he didn't come from a background like that. His family his mother was a judge. You know, his daddy worked at Dow Chemical his whole life. His sister worked at Dow Chemical. Everyone, you know, had this stable life. He had the loving family, the home life, you know, that I never had. You know, never had that. The stability that I yearned for and craved. He had it. 9 months later, here comes the bride. We get married, and a few months into our first marriage, he was telling me, you know, he smoked a little pot every now and again, and yada yada. We were talking one day, and I said, really? He said, yeah, I got a joint stored up, you know, in my safe or whatever. And I said, you do? Well, that's all it took. So I did that. Next thing you know, I'm doing everything else, and Tommy didn't know who I was because I couldn't stop. I kept on. So I'm going to fast forward because it wasn't pretty. We stayed married about 6 years, and in that 6 years, it was horrible. Unbelievable. Up and down. I mean, the things I did, you'd have to come to an AA story to hear all that. But I'm just needless to say, I put that poor man through all kind of hell. And when I finally crashed and burned, I literally went into a place where I couldn't even function. I had to have treatment, 4 months in a halfway house, and I'm married with a home. You know, I was scared to come out into the world. You know, because all I knew was performing. All I knew was being around all the things, you know, and I was terrified to come out into the world. So when I finally did, me and my husband could not keep it together. I had so much shame, so much guilt, so much stuff. And so we divorced. And in that time period, 10 years later, I did all kinds of soul journeys. I did all kind of work. Psychotherapy. I was in and out of sobriety. But, you know, I did shamanic work. And I did all kind of modalities to heal whatever it was, these demons inside of me. That's what I thought they were, and they probably were. Fast forward, 10 years later, I had built a medical spa with like 13 doctors. I was partners with 13 doctors. I mean, y'all, the problem with me is I never had a problem building things. I never had a problem doing any of that. What I had a problem was sustaining that. I would build these things, and I would just, oh, no problem, I can do that again. That was my mentality. I did that to the medical spa. Had a doctor there, really good doctor. She helped me do all this, you know. And what did I do? Go to her for drugs. Wasn't a good thing. Wasn't a good thing. I ended up crashing and burning again and picking myself back up and getting sober. And Tommy and I married during this stint. We married, I think I'd been sober 4 years, maybe, when we married the second time. When we married the second time. Here comes the bride. And we get married again. And it wasn't even a year later. I had a Reiki coach. And she lived in New York. And she convinced me, she was like a 5th level Reiki master. And she convinced me that was Renee then and this is Renee now. Renee then, you know, couldn't do all that because she hadn't done all this Reiki. She hadn't done all the spiritual stuff. She hadn't done all the things. So, there was that little demon in me that really wanted to believe that. Took off. I decided I could drink again. And thankfully, me and my husband didn't divorce. I did get sober because I almost died. I got sober on January the 8th, 2013. It was really, really a hard road. My husband and I married in 2010, and in 2013, I finally got sober again. And I've been sober ever since. But from January the 8th, 2013 to October 31st, 2014, something started happening to me. See, I never wanted to move in to the ranch. I never wanted to be a cattle rancher. He could do that. You take care of the cows. You take care of the hay. You take care of, getting all the the cow poop ever, I don't want to move any of the cow poop. I had a problem stepping all over stuff, I was kind of like the Green Acres, Zsa Zsa Gabor and whatever that is, if you ever saw Green Acres. I was like that. My husband was like the farmer. He wanted me involved. He wanted me to help him on the ranch. So he would always ask, why don't you go with me and help me open the gates? I'm like, no, you do that. I'm doing something else. I'm doing my yoga, my meditation, I'm producing a show. I said, you do that. And, and he said, but I need some help. I said, well, hire somebody. I didn't want to help him open gates. I didn't want to go out there and do any of that. So he comes home one day and he said to me, Renee, there is a rancher up the road that has a couple of baby calves that need a mama. Now, he planned this, and it backfired. See, he came home, told me, who couldn't have any kids, he said, they need a mama. And I was like, really? Babies? He said, yeah, they're babies. He said, you want to go look at them? I did. Little baby calves? Yeah, I wanted to go look at them. So he took me to look at them, and one of them was Bobo. She died very prematurely. But the other one was a little black calf with a little white heart on her head, and she came bouncing up to me, and I said, wow, aren't you a little rowdy girl? She would just frolic and kick her heels, and I said, yes, I'll buy these calves. So I bought them for $600, $300 a piece, took them home, and they became my reason for wanting to get up in the morning. And every night before I went to bed, right before sundown, I went out there to feed them. And little Bobo died. She never got her colostrum. But Rowdy Girl thrived. Rowdy Girl became a conduit for me. Now, I've always been a spiritual person. Through all of the years of alcohol and drug addiction, I always was into spiritual things. Always. It was the weirdest thing. It's like I even knew, when I was doing all the alcohol and drugs, I knew intuitively that I was doing all this and I wasn't going to do it forever, that it was going to be there was some reason I was doing it. I was doing it for a purpose. I didn't know why at the time, but I had that feeling. So when I started bottle feeding Rowdy Girl, spiritually, I began to see things I had never seen before. I was a yoga teacher at the time, a massage therapist. I've got my massage therapy license, all the things. And when I started seeing all the other cows, we had like 30. We didn't have a big herd. We had about 30 cows. And I began to go, I'd be bottle feeding her and I'd go, they're all black Angus or Brangas. They're black. Some of them had a little bit of white, but you can't typically tell them apart. They're just cows, right? Well, Rowdy Girl started showing me their differences. And I began to name them one by one. And you don't name cows if you're going to kill them. You don't name cows. You don't keep cows around if you're going to make any money. And so my husband would say, Renee, you got to stop naming them cows. You got to stop that. And I was like, but, they're showing me who they are. And I would tell my husband, you're showing me who they are. He was like, Renee, you need to stop that. You need to stop it right now. You need to, because he started getting really worried. Because this was he worked at Dow Chemical, but this was his, portfolio to add for his retirement, his cattle ranch. He baled hay. He sold calves every 6 months, took them to the sale barn. He didn't sell the cows, the actual big mamas. He sold their babies every 6 months. So the first time that he did that, when I was paying attention, first time I paid attention, I was going to go out there and help him. Because now I had Rowdy Girl. I had a reason. I was kind of in the thing now. I was becoming a cattle rancher's wife. And so I went out there to help him, and I began to watch what they were doing. And a part of me was wanting to help and do this and be a good cattle rancher's wife. And another part of me spiritually was going, there's something wrong with this. Part of me, I was very conflicted. I started going, what is wrong with this? They would open up this gate, this latch. The baby cows would go in and get the feed. The mamas would be all around. And this was all done over the course of a few days. It didn't happen instantly. My husband and his partner would bait these babies so that the babies would go in the trailer and the mamas would be all around, so the babies felt safe. And then as soon as there was like 6 or 7 of them in there, the chain was yanked back, the gate was shut, and boom, off they went. And the babies instantly burst tears. I saw it with my own eyes, tears. The mamas started chasing the trailer. Whenever that truck went up Highway 35, we had 1.5 miles of highway frontage. As soon as that truck and with the trailer went up the road, all them mamas, the mamas to those babies, not all the other cows, the mamas to those babies, ran up the whole 1.5 miles of that fence line, bellowing. It was a sound I'll never forget. I'll never forget that day. It did something to me. I didn't go vegan that day. I didn't even think about being a vegan. I felt so much pain. I never had kids. And what I was watching was mothers grieving for babies that we were taking away from them and selling. I saw that, and I couldn't unsee it. Some people can unsee it. Some people can see these things and just keep going through the motions of thinking, well, this is what we do for a living. This is what we do. We're feeding the world, yada, yada, yada. I've heard all the things. I could not unsee. And I believe it's because of my spiritual practice through the years. In one of my yoga teachers' training, we studied ahimsa, nonviolence. We studied that. I practiced vegetarianism for a while. I practiced all the things, but I never stuck to it. So when that happened, I told Tommy, I went in there and I said, Tommy, can't you hear all those cows crying, all the mamas? Can't you hear them outside? They were just like, oh. Anybody here ever heard a mama cow grieve? You know what I'm talking about. It is like, it's different than a moo, right? It's like guttural. It's like wailing grief. And it doesn't just happen for a few moments. It happens for a few days. They do everything they can to figure out where their babies are. They're grieving. They're struggling. I would go out there, and I'm a cattle rancher's wife. I'm not a vegan. I'm eating, filet mignons. I went out there, and I would get on my hands and knees, and I would cry with them because it affected me so bad. It touched me. It got through to me, but I wasn't a vegan. I was a Texas rancher's wife having a spiritual awakening on a cattle ranch, and I didn't know that. I didn't know I was opening up to this. It took another 4 years after that experience for me to become a vegan, and I didn't plan it. It wasn't like, I think I'm going to go vegan in a few years. What cattle rancher goes vegan, right? What dairy farmer goes vegan unless you want to kill your whole business? You don't go vegan on a cattle ranch or a chicken farm. That's your livelihood. So I wasn't even thinking about going vegan. What I was thinking about was this. I would come in and I would say to my husband, Tommy, why don't we eat our own cows? And I just kept trying to figure it out. He would say, why are you asking me that? I said, why don't we eat our own cows? Why do we sell our cows but go buy this top grade A beef at Whole Foods? He said, well, I can't eat a cow I know. I was like, oh. So you can eat a cow you don't know. It could be their brother or their mother or their sister or their baby, but you can't eat a cow you know. And so he was like, Renee, stop asking me these questions. He got real defensive. He didn't want to talk about it. You can't talk about it. If you talk about it, you go down the rabbit hole. If you talk about it too long, you eventually go down the rabbit hole. Well, anyway, I kept talking about it. I came home one day and I said, hey, we're gonna kill one of our cows. Which one? So what are you talking about? I said, look, if we're gonna be cattle ranchers, by golly, we're gonna slaughter one of our own animals and we're gonna feed our community. I went home and did this. He was like, "You're nuts." I said, "Why?" I said, I was going to this local herbal place where they sold bone broth, they sold, the cage-free eggs, they sold the milk from a local dairy, they did all this, and on the wall, they said something about some farmer was selling meat, you could just go to their house and order the meat, and you would know who the farmer was. I wanted to be that kind of farmer, by golly. If we're going to do this, we're going to be a real farmer. We're not going to send our cows to the sale barn. We're going to kill them ourselves. So, Tommy was like, "Renee, you have lost it." I said, "Why? Why can't you do that?" This is what happened to me. I didn't go vegan. I started pushing the envelope. I wanted to know why. And so, whenever I started doing that, he started getting really defensive. He was ready to sell the babies every 6 months. He tried to do it when I wasn't looking. Okay? He tried to do it when I wasn't there. He tried to plan it in a way where I would not, be around, because I was always, pushing him to know more, to know this, to do this. But it didn't help, because even though I wasn't there when I would come home, I could feel the emptiness. I could hear the mothers. I knew. And I would come inside and I would say, "You did it again. You did it again." He was like, "What? You did it again." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You sold some babies." I said, "Renee." He said, "Renee, that's what we do. You got to get some big girl panties on." He told me that. "You got to get some big girl panties on. You're a cattle rancher." I'm like, I just don't think I can ever get used to that. I said, "We're going to kill one of our own cows then. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." And so I pushed him. I said, "If we're going to kill one, which one's it going to be? Which one do you want to eat?" And he looked around and he said, "Well, if I have to choose, I guess I'll choose Broke Leg." And Broke Leg was Rowdy Girl's firstborn. Her firstborn baby, her firstborn son. And I said, "Why would you choose Broke Leg?" He said, "Well, he's probably not going to make it any, very long. He's a big bull. He's probably going to, that leg is probably going to, go out on him. And so I choose him." I said, "Okay." So then I went about into the community, started selling Broke Leg, pre-selling it. And, well, it never happened. Also during that time, I started getting our milk from a local dairy. I started buying all our milk from a local dairy. They'd bring our milk right to our house. It would be in these big mason jars, and the name of the cow would be on the top. We were drinking the milk from Polly, from Della, from Susie, whoever. So I felt so justified. I knew the cow I was drinking from. Their cheese, their butter, all of it. I was getting all that from a local dairy. I felt so righteous. Until I was on social media one day. I was on YouTube. And I was doing some research about what we were doing. I started researching around that time. And I started seeing what happens to the baby calves. I started watching slaughterhouse videos. Not a good thing if you're a cattle rancher. I would go into my husband and I would say, "Tommy, look what we are doing." I would show him, "Look what we're doing. Look at these animals when they're going through this kill floor. Is that what happens to our cows when you take them to the sale barn? Do they go from here to there?" He said, "Well, not all of them. Some of them probably get sold." He kept trying to make it look pretty. He kept trying to convince me it looked better than what it really was. And everything that I kept seeing showed just the opposite. And he told me, he said, "Renee, that is all PETA propaganda. Quit watching all that PETA propaganda." And I said, "I don't think this is no propaganda, Tommy. Now, this is all happening through 4 years, okay? I'm fast forwarding a little bit, okay? Because we had a lot of fights about this. Because I didn't like what we did. I wasn't a vegan, but I didn't like the fact that I would go out there and feed Rowdy Girl. I would see these cows, and then I began to start having relationships with them. I began to do yoga with them. I began to sing to them. I really started falling in love with cows. I loved being with them. And then he'd sell them. And I was like, oh my God. And I just felt this bitter hole in my gut. I began to just hate what we did. Hated it. I wasn't thinking about being a vegan. I was watching slaughterhouse videos every day. I was torturing myself. I was like, I couldn't believe that my husband, this kind, gentle soul, this man that I loved, that wouldn't harm a fly, that loved animals. I mean, we have, 7 dogs at home and 5 cats. I mean, we had a raccoon that we raised. My husband loved animals. And I couldn't believe this man was doing this. And so I was tortured. And I'm not a vegan. I just started waking up. He was at the time an elder in the Presbyterian church. And we were going to the Presbyterian church every Sunday. Because we'd go through these lines and I'd see all this stuff on the buffet. And I wasn't a vegan. But it began to affect me. I began to have these real oh my God, that could be Rowdy Girl, On October 31st, it's Halloween. And my husband walks in, he says, Renee, and I'm crying. Watching some slaughterhouse video. That's crazy. He said, Renee, you need to pull yourself together. We got to get to my mother's house. Her name was Effie, God rest her soul. He said, we got our Halloween block party we got to get to. All the in-laws, the outlaws, the kids, everybody would always get together every Halloween, and we would watch the Halloween parade go by with all the costumes and all the kids. And so he said, you need to go get yourself together. So I did. I got myself together, washed my face, put on my makeup, and we went to my mother-in-law's house. Well, but before we did that, I'm watching these slaughterhouse videos, and then I stumbled on a dissertation by Dr. Melanie Joy. She's a PhD, and she coined the term carnism. Carnism, C-A-R-N-I-S-M. And Dr. Melanie Joy, she had this little video going, and everybody, the family was sitting around a table, and they were eating beef stew. They were all eating beef stew, and I love beef stew. Okay, that was one of my favorites. They're all eating it. And somebody says, this is so good. What's the recipe? And she says, oh, I'm so glad you asked. You start out with a pound of very young golden retriever, a puppy. You start out with a young golden retriever. Everybody that was eating went, oh, they could not take another bite. What tasted so good became repulsive instantly because the image, the perception of what they were eating changed like that. They could eat chopped up dead cows, but they couldn't eat chopped up dead puppies. And they were like, and she was like, oh, I'm just kidding. It's really a cow. Well, needless to say, they could not keep eating because at that instant, their consciousness was jolted. For at that instant, something got through, and that happened to me. At that moment, something got through. I've been watching all those slaughterhouse videos, and I was like, oh! I thought to myself, I could be eating chopped up puppies and not even know it. I mean, look what's in the bowl. That's what I'm thinking to myself. We go to my mother-in-law's, walk into the house, all the kids are in their costumes playing, everybody's talking, everybody's chattering. My mother-in-law comes out with a pot of beef stew. You can't make this up. It was divinely orchestrated. My mother-in-law takes the lid off, and she gets the lid on. She says, Renee, would you like? And I was like, everything was slow motion. I was like, no, ma'am. I was like, I can't eat that. And everybody got quiet for a minute. They looked at me, and my mother-in-law was like, why? I said, because it's got floating, dead, hacked up animal bodies in it, and I can't eat it. Yeah. And at that moment, hey, I wasn't thinking about being a vegan. At that moment, I slid down some rabbit hole. I mean, it was as if all of a sudden the powers that be said, okay, here's your chance. 1, 2, ready, go. And man, once I slid down, there was a whole nother world. I became an ethical vegan on the spot. I didn't even know I was becoming a vegan because I was so oppressed. When you live in a state of oppression, especially in our society that worships animal agriculture, Our society worships animal agriculture. I mean, look, farmers get all the tax breaks. You know, a normal person can't have 147 acres of land or 500 acres of land, not unless you're in agriculture in some way, fashion, or form. It worships it. So, anyway, my husband was like, Renee. I mean, this is his mother, the judge. And Effie was like, oh, what did you say? And I repeated it. It's got floating dead, hacked up animal bodies eating in it, and I ain't eating it. And she was like, well, you can pick it out. And I was like, nope, there ain't no more picking it out for me. At that moment, it was on. My poor husband didn't know what had hit him because, see, something changed. How many of you have ever watched vampire movies? Vampire movies. Vampire, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I have a confession to make. Yeah, you were last night talking about one thing, you know, what is it when you don't want somebody, one thing you want somebody to know about you that they may not know? I love vampire movies, okay? I want you to know that about me. I love them. And all of a sudden I had this memory, I had this thought. It's kind of like becoming a vampire. When a human becomes a vampire, so this is what I've learned. Everything about their world changes. They go into the dark. They suck blood. They want blood. They want to live in the dark. The light kills them. So when you go vegan for the animals, when you become an ethical vegan, not for health reasons is totally different. Eating a raw food diet, eating a vegan diet, plant-based or whatever, for health reasons is good. But it isn't down the rabbit hole. You know, even an environmental vegan isn't down the rabbit hole. When you become that ethical vegan, something happens. And that happened to me. And Tommy was like, Renee, I cannot believe, what did you just do? You have just destroyed our family. I mean, all of a sudden, I destroyed the family because I wouldn't eat beef stew. And because I told him it was floating dead, hacked up animal bodies. Well, it was, but we called it beef stew. But it is floating dead, hacked up animal bodies. It could be anybody's body. Who really knows what's in that package? Who knows? As soon as we got home that day, I started taking all the meat out of the refrigerator. I took all the milk out, all the cheese out, and Tommy says, what are you doing? And he said, I live here too. I said, well, you may live here, but I ain't gonna allow any animal products in this house. I said, I can't do it anymore. I mean, I literally was going nuts. So, like the vampire craves blood, when you become an ethical vegan, you crave light. You crave the energy from the sun. You crave all the things that light is made of. And none of it is about darkness or death. None of it. And I didn't know that until I went down the rabbit hole. In that rabbit hole, you dare not go there unless you want to see through the eyes of the animal. Because if you see through the eyes of the animal, you won't have any more excuses. That was my story. I had no more excuses. I couldn't do it. My husband was a big deer hunter and wild game hunter. I mean, there was heads all over our house. You know, I never really cared about it before. In fact, I even painted them. That day I went vegan, I walked into the house, all those eyes were looking at me. And I ducked my head and I went, ah! Y'all went nuts. I'm not kidding, I went nuts. And my husband was like, what is wrong with you? I said, you got to get these heads out of here. I had, just like a vampire, I had become that. I couldn't stand it. It was like all over me. This is at first. I've calmed down. I've calmed down. But at first, I could hardly stand it. I became highly sensitive. From that day on, I started living with the cows. I didn't want to be in my house. The next day, after I went vegan on November 1st, I walked outside and it had been raining. And the rain had stopped, and there was a light fog drifting on top of the pasture. There was a fog. And I looked outside and I could see the cows out there. I could see the cows. And I remember standing there in my spiritual state of being a newborn vegan. A newborn vegan. And I looked around on a cattle ranch in Texas. And I said, wow. This could be a sanctuary for cows. What a thought! You know, this could... Yesterday it was a cattle ranch. Today, by golly, it's a sanctuary. And that's the way I lived it. From that moment on, I started seeing that. Tommy would try to sell the cows, and I would say over my dead body, you're not selling them cows. In fact, he was loading them all up one day. I walked out there, and I said, you will not take them cows to the sale barn. I was probably 2 weeks vegan. I walked out there, and I said, you take them cows up the road one more time, true story, I will follow you. I will go to that sale barn with your credit card, and I'll buy them all back, and I'll bring them all back home. You try me. And he was like, Renee, you stay out of my blankety blank business. Jumped his foot, threw his hat down, and I was like, this is no longer a business. No longer. He said, it is my business. I said, no, it isn't. Them cows are now like my family. I went from seeing them as cattle, individuals, to like, I was their only hope. Remember how I was raised? I saved my mama. I did everything. There was nothing in me that was going to let him kill them cows. He would kill them over my dead body. I almost killed my daddy at 8 years old with a butcher knife. You try me. Because he was killing my mama. So I had this fire burning in me. High pitter. I had this fire, by golly, you will not. I was like, he said, Renee, you're really crossing the line. You are crossing the line. I said, I'm over it. I ain't crossing, I'm over it. I said, you will have to put a bullet through me. And I'm in it. I'm in it. I couldn't stand what we were doing. I literally, if he would have taken those cows to market, I think I would have probably drank again at that point. I couldn't do that. I had to be true to myself. And so, you know, I went back in the house, and because he had not gotten rid of the deer heads, I started getting all my backpack, my yoga mat, you know, my poncho, my blanket, I got my guitar, and I started going out with the cows, and I lived with them from sun up to sundown. Well, I became one of them. When they moved, I moved. When they sat down and rested, I rested with them. When they ate and stuff, I would sit down and eat. I would sing to them. I would do yoga. This happened for a couple of months. You know, I used to think that all these trails that cows make, you know, those trails they make, I used to think that was roads. I used to think Tommy did that with his Kawasaki mule. No, cows actually make these trails, you know, and you can follow it. So what I would start doing is I would start going wherever those trails, wherever they went, when they walked and moved, you know, through our land, I would do it too. If I had to go under a tree, if I had to go through the water, whatever it was, you know, it wasn't like deep, but, you know, I would just do what they did. I was taking on the energy of what it meant to be them. And I began to get really close to them, have individual experiences with each and every one of them. By that time, I had started amassing a following on a secret journal. On Facebook, I started a journal called Secret Journal of a Cattle Rancher's Life. On October 31st that night, I got on Facebook for the first time and looked up vegans. For the first time ever, I looked up what it meant to be a vegan, because I knew I had become one. Because I'd heard about it, doing all the PETA research and all the stuff. I said, God, I'm a vegan. You know, my God, I'm a vegan. You know, I'm married to Tommy, I'm a vegan, oh my God. And so I was looking for a vegan that I could talk to. And I found one. She'd been vegan 17 years, her and her husband. And her name is Jeannie. She lives in Oregon. And she told me what I needed to do. She said, Renee, you need to have a voice for all of this. This is so unusual. I don't know anybody that this has happened to. You need to put a plea out on Facebook and tell everybody in the vegan community what you're up to. And I was like, what? I'll have to do it behind my husband's back. She says, well, you do it. And so she gave me the courage to do it. I started amassing huge amounts of following,
hundreds of people, like every day. It was just like growing because I poured my heart out in this journal. I told my story of a cattle rancher's wife that was trying to save her husband's cows from slaughter. I wanted to save them. I didn't know what Tommy was. The only reason why we didn't divorce at that time is because he was afraid if he left me, I would take over and keep the cows. And I was afraid that if he stayed and I left, he would sell the cows. So we were at a stalemate. He was going to sell them all. He was just going to get out of the business altogether because he had this wife that went vegan. All I know is I started that journal, started amassing the following, and then I met Kip Anderson, which is the director of Cowspiracy, Seaspiracy, What the Hell, all the big documentaries. He came to me and he heard about it because my story started circulating around the vegan community like wildfire. Because being a Texas cattle rancher going vegan was so, nobody had done that. So all of a sudden, all this, it's like, it just started circulating. Everybody started talking about it all over the vegan community. And I didn't realize what was going on. Kip Anderson called me or texted me and he said, tell me what you're doing now. He's a high-powered documentarian, very high-powered. And he was like, what are you doing? What are you up to? And I was like, well, I told him the whole story. And he said, wow. He said, well, let me help you. You need to do a fundraiser. You need to do a fundraiser and buy your husband's cows, and you can do it on Indiegogo. And I was like, really? A fundraiser to buy my husband's cows? Me, his wife, buy his cows? He said, well, I did that with Cowspiracy. I don't know how much he raised. I was like, okay, well, show me how to do it. So anyway, between him and another attorney I met, we did that. We started putting it out there. I'm going to buy my husband's cows. Donations started pouring in. I went out to my husband because now I'm feeling cocky, confident. He didn't know anything about this. He did not know I was doing all this.
Oh, yes.
And I went to him one day, right when I was raising all that money and all this was happening, out in the middle of the field again. I said, Tommy, if you're going to sell all these cows and you're going to get out of business, why don't you just sell them to me? Now, I'd already devised this, we already had this thing going on he knew nothing about. He said, sell them to you? Are you crazy? Yep. I've lost my mind. This is what I said. I lost my mind and I got a new one. And I want to buy your cows. He said, you're my wife. You don't have any money. That's what he said. I said, well, what if I could raise the money? What if I could raise the money? Would you let me buy your cows? Now, he didn't know was raising money. He said, oh, yeah, right, Renee, sure. I'll let you. I said, okay. And he was just kidding. Like he was thinking, nah, you're right. I said, it's okay. So if you were going to sell them, how much would you sell them for? I could probably get 30, maybe 40,000, depending on the summer pregnant. Because if they're pregnant, they get more money, And if they're a cow-calf pair, they get more money. And so he said, you're my wife, I'll give it to you for 30. Deal. I said, will you let me lease the land for $1 a year? He said, sure, Renee. I said, how about 2 years? Sure, Renee. He laughed. What are you talking about? I said, just humor me for a second. If I can do it, will you let me? He said, yeah. He shook my hand. You do not. Tommy Sonnen shakes your hand. It's done. You don't need a contract with that man. Okay? Anyway, I go back to my journal. Tommy said I could buy the cows, And so here it goes, I'm already raising the money, so now it really took off. And so next couple of days, I went into Tommy and I said, Tommy, I've already raised like $7,000. He's like, what? I said, yeah, I've got this secret diary on Facebook, and I got all these vegan friends, and they want to help me buy the cows. He was just like mortified. What? Vegans? I was like, yeah, and I'm all excited. We're going to be a sanctuary. I'm like all wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, We're going to be a sanctuary. You in Texas? You can't be a sanctuary for cows in Texas. I was like, well, we're going to, and I'm buying your cows. You said I could. You shook my hand. And so he was like, okay. So he could not go back on his word. He watched me raise the money. Every step of the way, he started getting more and more convinced. He started talking to some of my vegan friends. I would put him on the phone and say, listen to this. documentaries would be recommended, he'd watch them. Now, what turned him around, was Forks Over Knives. Forks Over Knives had the T. Colin Campbell in it, you know. Y'all heard of T. Colin Campbell? Yeah. So T. Colin Campbell was all about the China study. And that is what turned my husband finally to go plant-based. But it was he couldn't go vegan for the animals. He was a cattle rancher. He didn't believe in all the environmental stuff at the time. He does now, but what he did was he could do it for his health. A lot of us get there for our health, right? So he could do it for his health because his daddy died of a heart attack at the age of 62 years old. And so on May 2nd, 2015, Tommy went vegan. I went vegan October 31st, 2014. February the 20th, 2015, we became a nonprofit. We'll have our 10-year anniversary while I'm here. And May 2nd, we had our first ever vegan awareness festival and fundraiser for Rowdy Girl Sanctuary. I raised the rest of the money. I'd raised all of it, but like a few $1,000s. And so I did this festival and brought all these people in from all over. Kip Anderson came and some others, and they did talks, and we had about 100 people show up, and I raised about, I don't know, $6,000 or $7,000 that day. Enough money, more than enough, more than what I needed to give my husband, pay off the cow, right? Yay! And then that day, because we had a sponsor, we had Follow Your Heart cheese, we had So Delicious ice cream, we had all the stuff that, you know, Tommy just couldn't go vegan because he loved cheese, he loved ice cream, he loved all that. And so when he figured out, this is Tommy, that he could eat cheese and ice cream, and he could be vegan, he was like, I remember he was going across the pasture, and in the Kawasaki Mule, and he was waving at me. And he was doing, I said, yeah. He was like, he held up this So Delicious ice cream. And he said, I'm vegan. And I was like, you're vegan? And so he went vegan on May 2nd. And y'all, it has been an interesting ride. For 10 years, we've gone through 3 epic floods where we've had to evacuate all of our animals and then ourselves. We've had to buy a whole new property. And we're in Welder, Texas, near Austin. We have 147 acres there, and we have right at 130 animals. And our story is going all over the world. We have a documentary out called Rowdy Girl that's had its world debut at Toronto Hot Docs. Its United States debut was at the Hampton Film Festival. And I just signed a publishing agreement for my book while I was here just a few days ago. So that's with Bloomsbury. Bloomsbury published all the Harry Potter books. So I don't know. All I know is this story of a cattle rancher's wife having a spiritual awakening on a cattle ranch, and her husband, who she married not once but twice. And we have a beautiful place in Welder. We have private tours. We have volunteers that come. We are supported by donations. We have a 501c3 nonprofit. We have almost 800 members, sustaining members. It's called the Rowdy Club, where people, donate every month. We have a rich culture of folks. I have an international team. I have full-time animal caretakers. We got two part-time. I got an administrative assistant, an executive assistant, a marketing director, development consultant, all the things. Social media team. Y'all, it started out with just me having a breakdown on a cattle ranch. It started out with me and finally Tommy going vegan, and it was just us. This has become a movement. There's something happening with this story. And I am the voice of Rowdy Girl, the cow. Rowdy Girl is still alive. She's still with me. I talk to her all the time. I talk to her intuitively, even right here. I am connected to Rowdy Girl, like right now. I am here delivering her message. I don't know where she begins or I end. We are one. If it wasn't for that little calf waking me up and showing me the truth, I would not be standing here. And she is still keeping me busy, even today. So y'all, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you for listening. I'm always around to ask questions. Thank you.